YouTube subscribers who he helps be the best version of themselves. And today we're going to be discussing nutrition, health, and poker, which are things that do not always get discussed together. So, Thomas, hello. Who are you? And how did you get into health and nutrition?
Yeah, man. So first of all, pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me on. But I wasn't always into health and nutrition. I was in the medical setting, but I wasn't exactly healthy. I was 300 pounds at that time, and corporate healthcare. I mean, just abbreviating here, but typical corporate slave. Hated my job, hated my life. Overweight. My body reflected my personality. I was didn't like it, right? And I was an athlete in college and in high school. And, one day I looked in the mirror and I'm like, who the heck have I become? What is going on? But I realized that I had something kind of unique. I had the ability I was in medical sales. So I had the ability to articulate like nutrition and biochemistry and all these things that mattered to physicians. I just didn't look the part. And I realized, you know what, if I just get my act together and I get this working, I have the ability to really just share my transformation in a way that gets people motivated and excited and shares the biochemistry. And I just kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, kind of struck gold because I realized that's what my gift was being able to articulate that. So now flash forward, 5, 6 more years, and I am involved with multiple military applications in terms of cognitive nutrition, work with a lot of Silicon Valley in terms of biohacking, cognitive nutrition. And that's really become my wheelhouse. Obviously, I've lost the weight. I like to think I'm in decent shape, but my focus really is on the brain. Any potential we have with our bodies or anything else, it starts here. So I've just become fascinated, and let's not joke, I've become obsessed. So that's where we are today.
Yeah, so you're in decent shape. We see an image of you here with slightly shorter shirt on. So how did you get out of shape? Because I ask this because a lot of poker players come from an athletic mindset or an athletic training, and then usually something happens that makes them kind of have to get out of athletics, but they're still really competitive and they inevitably get into poker because it's also a very competitive game. So what made you get out of shape, and then how did you generally just get back into shape as someone who didn't really have a great reason to get back in shape because you didn't necessarily need to do that for your job?
Yeah, you nailed it, first of all. Not many people actually nail that because it was just that. I was competitive. I was an athlete in high school and college. I knew I had it in me mentally. But when you get into the corporate world, or you get in that same hyper-focused state, I got hyper-focused on career. I got hyper-focused on money. I got hyper-focused on that. And that just affected everything that I did. So I went from, running 100 miles a week and lifting as much as I was lifting to eating the same way as if I was still doing that, becoming hyper competitive in I guess, just American dream, right? I mean, so focused on that. And then I've been with my wife since high school. So my wife has been with me through this roller coaster, bless her heart. She's just been I know that she loves me for me because she's, it really did kind of come down to looking at her one day. She never breathed a word about my weight or anything. Never would she. She was so cool. But I looked at her, I'm like, she doesn't deserve this slob. Seriously, sure, I'm providing for her, but she doesn't deserve this. So it really was that kind of flipped it for me. And then in terms of the practical or sort of logistical piece, I predominantly utilized intermittent fasting and the ketogenic diet, which is much of what my brand is around today. Because when it comes to cognitive performance, those really are the cream of the crop. With military applications that I work with, we're always looking at that because there's just undeniable evidence in terms of just cognitive function, the brain running on ketones. But that wasn't why I did it at the time. I did it at the time because I wanted to lose weight, and it did work. I lost 110 pounds in a little over a year. At the time, I was kind of medically supervised because I had a lot of physicians in my ballpark from that I had worked with, and they were all sort of they were unconventional physicians because they were working in what's called a concierge, fee-for-service medicine, which means that they were much more focused on patient outcome because they would be focused on making sure the patient gets a result. Otherwise, the patient doesn't directly pay them. They weren't working through insurance. So they really would look at these sort of almost esoteric, at the time, somewhat fringe nutrition protocols. So it was somewhat doctor supervised for the first few months, but I lost 50 pounds in like the first 3.5 months. It was insane. And then all of a sudden I realized like, okay, this is pretty easy. And then just got obsessed with the science of it. I was like, why is this working? This is so cool. And here we are.
Awesome. I lost about 40 pounds a while back. It must have been goodness, it must have been like 10 years ago. By basically just I stopped drinking soda and stopped eating a whole lot of pasta and chicken pot pies, and I just started, eating lean meats and vegetables, and turns out the weight falls right off. Chaos Theory here in the chat says that he found you about 4 months ago and has lost about 60 pounds since then. So you're helping all sorts of people out there. And
awesome. Very cool.
that is fantastic. All right, so you're clearly in very good physical shape. Are health, fitness, and nutrition generally relevant for mental performance, or are they not related at all?
Very, very much so related. And there's a lot of interesting pieces. There's a lot of, correlation doesn't always equal causation, but there also is a lot of things, we call it cognitive performance because I like to focus on it as performance, because when we start looking at just like, oh, I want to feel smarter. Oh, this, it's not exciting. It's not sexy. It doesn't get people, but when you actually think of it as like, this is performance, like this really is. And, poker flat out puts it like that. Right. But you also look at, expert marksmen, things like that. Like their brains need to be on fire. Like they need to be focused. They need to be in the moment. And there's not enough meditation in the world that's going to really like override a lot of the nutritional protocols that you can implement. So exercise, nutrition independently are phenomenal for your brain. Yes. Combined, they do some really powerful things, which we can talk about in a little bit. But yes, they are very much so connected.
So there are some people out there who think that if you study poker enough, you will inevitably be able to play every spot perfectly because you know it. But poker's a very complicated game, right?
Yeah.
Imagine tic-tac-toe. None of us are going to mess up tic-tac-toe even if we're like drunk because it's an easy game, right? Whereas poker actually is kind of like tic-tac-toe, but with a bazillion different moves. Does being in shape and, thinking clearly like help you recall things better, or is it irrelevant?
Yeah, well, it definitely helps you recall, but I think one of the things that we want to look at is a word called resiliency, right? Being resilient. And that is what's really important. And I don't mean resilient in terms of just being able to deal with some stress. I mean, really being able to be good under stress. And we don't realize, but when we get stressed out, we have our fight or flight hormones that kick in and they alter our judgment. And a lot of times they alter our judgment and our decision-making process in ways that we don't understand. We don't even see it until we almost look at it retroactively. Now, when you look at it nutritionally, what happens is with things like, let's say intermittent fasting, for example, just because it's a very clear example. I'm not saying—
What is intermittent fasting for those who do not know?
Intermittent fasting is not even a diet. It's a meal timing system. So it can work with any diet. I don't care if you're a carbaholic. I don't care if you're a vegan. I don't care if you're keto. All that intermittent fasting is a timing system, period, where you condense the timing in which you eat your food. So instead of eating 3 square meals a day, those 3 square meals are compressed into generally like an 8-hour eating period. So you're fasting for 16 hours and you're still eating roughly the same amount of calories. You're just compressing the window in which you eat it. And the big picture of what that does is by having an extended period of time in which you're not eating, it triggers the body to have a stress response. Okay. And this stress response is what is adapting, what is allowing you to adapt. It's getting you stronger. So the stress response, yes, it burns fat, because if your body thinks that you're going to be running from a tiger, it's going to start liquidating a lot of that fat so that you have energy. Okay. It's not like what the old school infomercials back in the 90s used to say about, cortisol and belly fat. Cortisol, believe it or not, this is way too biochemistry to deal with right now, but cortisol can actually be very beneficial for fat burning when it's controlled. Good stress is great stress for you. Bad stress is a different ballgame. So controlling your stress with fasting makes you resilient. So then when you apply that into a setting where you're at the poker table and you have 500 things going on at one time, you also need to be focused. You may not realize it, but your body's under a great amount of stress. Well, if you're able to actually handle that stress because you've trained it nutritionally, also, of course, physically too, you're going to be better than the guy sitting next to you that's not. And that's plain and simple. And the studies are clear as day with that.
Awesome. I know whenever I'm playing poker, I can be feeling perfectly fine in my brain, probably because I've played poker a very long time and it's just like normal. But at the same time, I'll just be like drenched in sweat from sitting in this chair, presumably just thinking the whole time. And kind of a bizarre thing because like I don't feel stressed, But like obviously I am because I'm not sweating like a lunatic any other
Yeah.
time, right?
It's your brain is 2% of your overall body weight, but takes 20% of your overall energy load. Let that noodle in for a second, right? Like something that is only 2 pounds takes up 20% over your overall energy needs. That just tells you how powerful those cells are and how much energy they are taking. And it's the first thing that you're going to feel when you start getting fatigued, because just by leverage, that's going to be the biggest impact.
Interesting. So what is the difference between good stress and bad stress? Joseph here in the chat's wondering.
It's a good question. And Angela Duckworth, out of Harvard, did some really interesting research on this, because some of it is perception. Some of it is, there was an interesting study showed that if you took, like a 5-year-old that was excited to go to Disneyland tomorrow and compared that to, someone that's stressed out about their TPS reports being due, yes, Office Space, then the stress response physiologically is very similar. It's just how we perceive it changes the effect on our body, which is really wild. So like basically, like if you perceive stress as a good thing, like I'm working hard, I'm earning this, I'm at the gym, I'm working hard, it's still stress. Stress is stress is stress, but how we perceive it is different. That being said, it's not that simple, because something like, intermittent fasting, a self-inflicted stress, is not the same as, a family member dying. Like it's a different kind of stress. But I will say that the physiological response, as far as the hormones and what are called catecholamines, like epinephrine, adrenaline, those responses are fairly similar. And if you've heard of people, maybe you've heard of people doing like ice baths before, the reason people do those is because they are building resiliency to stress. Like it's not fun to go sit in a 35, 39 degree pool of water, not in the slightest. And there's no way in heck that you can perceive that to be fun. You sick and twisted individual if you do. But it's not fun. But again, like when I do it, my perception is I'm getting stronger. I'm getting stronger. I'm getting stronger. And it works. I mean, again, evidence is very clear. So when I say like, what is good stress versus bad stress? It's pretty obvious, actually. You just have to look at like, what is like self-inflicted positive adaptation versus what is something that is really wrecking your life. I don't suggest that like you go cause trauma and terrible things to happen in your life to try to make you more resilient. I say you do controlled things, take cold showers now and then, restrict, try taking a break from eating. So it's a little bit of a struggle sometimes. Sit in a sauna at a high temperature for a little while and build some resiliency so your cells adapt.
Yeah, so I actually discovered the Wim Hof method like 6 years ago,
Yes.
before it was popular, and I've been taking freezing showers every morning. I do think it's fun, probably because I'm insane. And I always make a point every winter to like make a video or two where I'm like outside in my shorts and t-shirt in the blizzard. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally.
So people who want to get started with intermittent fasting, what does that even mean? Like as a very, very brief primer, if somebody wants to give it a try, what do they have to change from a regular diet, regular 3 square meal a day diet or routine?
All I would do is, if you're just jumping into this, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, skip breakfast and consolidate your breakfast to be having your breakfast around lunchtime, having a smaller lunch around maybe 2 or 3 p.m. and then having your dinner. And then that's really it. You're not even skipping breakfast, you're delaying breakfast. If you feel, because this is probably going to happen, like you just don't even want to eat the meal in the middle, that lunch meal, you can skip it. Okay, because yes, you're going to lose weight that way, because then you're clearly going to put yourself in a caloric deficit. Because you will find that, because your stomach is very, very flexible. It's called distensibility. And when you go 16 hours without eating, all it takes is one time for your stomach to shrink. And the signals are going to be like, oh, I'm not even that hungry. So that being said, but I like to recommend just starting on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I recommend a 16-hour fasting period. So that means, let's just say you stop eating at 8 p.m. Okay. 12 hours is going to be 8 a.m. And then 4 more hours on top of that is 12. So you're just not eating until 12, 3 days a week. And then I think you're going to find that you feel very energized. You're going to feel very alive and awake during that fasting period. And you'll find that after you eat, you really recognize how sluggish we tend to feel after we eat. But by contrast, we never get a chance to notice it because we're always eating, especially in the Western Hemisphere. It's just like we constantly, like I know that Europeans like to kind of space their meals out a little bit more. And it tends to work for them. But that's what I would recommend just as a beginning phase.
So basically skip breakfast. Or push it back, whatever you want to call it. Can people have like coffee or tea or something like that at normal breakfast time?
Yes.
I suppose not with like tons of milk or something, but
Yeah, I would recommend, as you're getting started, you can ease into it. Black coffee, black tea, straight green tea without any sweeteners or any creamers is really the best way, because you got to remember, if it has calories, it's realistically going to break a fast. But there's certain things that you can have during a fast that technically break a fast, but actually, might even help you a little bit. I know we've talked about like, like Brain Fuel, like that's a great product that, yeah, I know you talk about a lot and I talk about a lot. Like that's a good one, just because it's kind of designed with fasting in mind, for this kind of thing. It's a cognitive sort of performance beverage. So my point with that is like, there's things that technically have calories that break a fast, but you have to ask yourself, okay, am I trying to like have a squeaky clean fast, or am I trying to like get a benefit here? Because like there's a time and a place for both. A lot of times I don't have anything when I fast, but a lot of times I will have some MCT oil, or I will have some coconut oil, or I'll have a brain fuel, because my goal isn't necessarily weight loss in that given day. It's supreme cognitive function. And just by reducing the caloric load on your body and the digestive load, that's more energy that's allocated to your brain, not having to digest a bunch of food.
I presume, like, does calories in, calories out apply? Like, if you eat the same amount of calories, you're not necessarily going to lose weight, but you will perhaps utilize the calories better?
That's a very good thing to bring up, because physics will show you that calories in, calories out is a law. It is a law of physics that is undeniable. Like, the problem is we don't always, like, a calorie is not always a calorie, and a calorie, how we burn and how a calorie is perceived in the body is not always the same. I want you to think about this. Like, okay, for all intents and purposes, calories are like a fire burning in your body. Well, if you start a forest fire and it's really dry out, that fire is going to burn a lot hotter and take off. But if it's really humid and it's not windy, the fire doesn't really go anywhere, right? There's a lot of environmental things that we have to factor in. And those environmental things in our bodies are a lot of times things we can't control. Hormones, stress, things like that. And that dictates how a calorie is treated. So the calorie is still the almighty calorie, because that is energy and that is a law of physics. But how it is seen in the body and how it is utilized is different. And I would make the argument, as well as hundreds of research papers, that when you have periods of time of keeping your insulin levels low, when you do eat calories, they're generally going to be allocated in a better way. They're generally going to be allocated towards muscle building, towards brain-derived neurotrophic factor, where you're building new neurons and driving those kind of growths. But again, yes, you should still pay attention to your calories, because there are people that do intermittent fasting that get to a point where they reach a plateau, and you have to ask yourself, like, well, if you're still eating 5,000 calories a day, you're just cramming it in three meals in a window, you probably aren't going to lose weight. But if you feel good and you're not gaining weight, I mean, there's something to be said for that, because if you feel good, you'll probably be more active, and consequently down the line, you'll lose weight.
Awesome. So are there any other quick fixes that people who live a somewhat sedentary life based on their job, like poker players, office workers, etc., can do to improve their health, energy levels, and ability to focus beyond intermittent fasting?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple tips. One thing that isn't talked about a lot is we have these little glucose receptors in our body. They're called GLUT4 transporters, and their job is to accept blood sugar and glucose that's floating through the system. Well, they're on the they come to the surface of a cell to grab glucose. I want you to think of it as like a net that is being cast into your bloodstream to grab glucose. Well, that net can only get cast if the body is moving. And the crazy thing is it doesn't take much movement to make that happen. So I always say the best posture is the next posture, because it will activate those things. So if you're sitting at the poker table and you're hunched over like this and you don't move for 2 hours, you're not activating any of those glucose receptors. So none of the fuel that you're eating is going anywhere. It's not getting a chance to get into the cell. I kid you not. It literally takes doing something like this, like to actually move and get something going. And it sounds so cheesy and lame, but if you were to even, have your hands in your pockets and flex your muscles, not even noticeably, so you don't look like a complete wingnut, but, or you could just throw up a front double bicep and just go for it. Just, that can be your brand, whatever. But the point is when you contract your muscles, it forces this transporter to reach into the bloodstream and grab glucose. What does that do? That kickstarts your metabolism. So what I typically do is when I'm working and I have got, 4 or 5 hours of work, every 30 minutes or so, I will drop and I'll do 10 push-ups, 15 push-ups, 20 push-ups, 50, whatever. The point is, it doesn't take much and it makes an astronomical difference. The other thing that you might want to consider doing is just considering adopting, ketogenic principles part of the day.
What are ketogenic principles? What does
So
that
that's
mean?
just going to be, eliminating the carbohydrates part of the time. And you
Okay.
don't have to do that all the time. You don't have to live a ketogenic lifestyle. I am a fan of it because it's worked well for me, but I also understand that some people just don't feel that great on it. That's totally fine. But there's one thing for certain, by keeping carbohydrates out of the equation, you eliminate that blood sugar roller coaster, and it allows you to be more in control with what you're after. And if you do go all the way and go into ketosis, then you will find that you do have a pretty significant boost in brain performance. And that's been demonstrated in some really recent journals that took a look at people with cognitive decline. And they found, okay, as these people were losing metabolic function within their brain, they give them carbohydrates and their brain just was only utilizing a certain percentage of it. They got the carbohydrates out of their diet, put them into ketosis, and they found that the ketones went into the brain and actually provided the brain with just as much fuel as the brain had 10 years, 20 years earlier. So basically, the brain cells have the ability to run on an alternative fuel source in spite of cognitive decline. So as people are getting older and they're losing some of their mental charm, they can have the ability to reinvigorate that by switching over to ketones. So it's something to consider if you feel like, wow, I'm just not as sharp as I used to be. I'm not saying you have to become like a dogmatic hardcore keto person, but if you get your body used to it every now and then on the days that you're playing or on the days where you feel like you really need to be sharp, you go into ketosis a couple days prior to that by cutting out the carbs and going, a little bit higher in the fat, eating some things like, eggs and some bacon, but keeping the carbs out, your body will run on that alternative fuel source and you will notice a huge, huge difference.
So, what are carbs for those who do not know? What are some things that people are
Yep.
eating on a regular basis that they should probably cut out?
The first thing that I would usually say is the obvious things like the breads. Those are going to be the carbohydrates that are pretty obvious.
Breads are like pastas,
Breads,
chips,
pastas, chips, things like that.
bread,
Things that you're gonna find a lot of, at
cookies,
the dinner
cake.
table. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So anything that's starchy, a little bit of fruit is okay. That's a little bit of a gray area, but if you look at the label of something, I mean, flat out, if it has more than 4 or 5 grams of carbohydrates, it probably shouldn't be in your diet if you're aiming to have more cognitive function at that time. And I'm not telling you that you like have to live your life in this really boring way. I mean, the other thing is that there are a lot of really good like keto foods out there now. Like so many brands have come out with keto cookies and keto chips and all this stuff that take this into consideration. So the snack foods are still there. You just have to be, more cognizant of it. And we're seeing it, within the racing community, within NASCAR and things like that, where they're looking all these things that where drivers need to be focused. Drivers need to have cognitive focus. And they're like, wait a minute, we don't want to be pumping these guys full of like sugary energy drinks because the carbohydrates are making them, plummet again. We want to give these guys good, sustainable fats that are going to provide them with fuel for a long period of time. So it's a long list of what you can't eat, but it's an even longer list of things you can eat.
Gotcha. Okay, and people can follow you on YouTube, youtube.com/Thomas DeLauer official to see all sorts of videos on this. I'm sure they can just search your name and ketosis or ketogenic diet and it'll come right up.
Yeah, I think just by watching this video, they'll probably get retargeted by a bunch of stuff. The way the internet is, I don't know.
Fair enough. Okay, so what are some foods to eat before we know we have to go sit and focus at the poker table? And what should we be eating like before, during, and after?
Super good question. If you are adapted to it and you feel good without eating, my lead up would be not eating,
All right.
because I think you will find at the poker table that you are much more on it and much more astute and much more mentally acute if you are not digesting something. A lot of times there's a very powerful placebo effect in people that don't eat. They find like, oh my gosh, I have to eat. But when you actually look at their blood sugar levels and stuff like that, nothing reflects it whatsoever. They're not actually needing to eat. It's all in the head. Very few people are actually legitimately in the US starving. It's not, we're not starving. We have this perception of starving. So that would be my first thing. Also, sipping on something like keto coffee or bulletproof coffee, which is where you take a cup of coffee, you add a little bit of grass-fed butter, you add some MCT oil to it, you add a little bit of sweetener like a stevia or a monk fruit or a Splenda, and you whip it up in like a magic bullet blender, or you just froth it. Okay, that is called, Dave Asprey coined it bulletproof coffee. So technically that's like trademarked as a name, but that's really what it's commonly called, but it's really just keto coffee. And you don't even have to be in keto to reap the benefits of it. It's just you would use that as like your breakfast replacement in a way, because you're going to have a couple hundred calories in it with the butter and the coconut oil / MCT oil. So you're getting that benefit there, but it doesn't have a heavy digestive load. And the fats are going to help mobilize more, or excuse me, the caffeine is going to help mobilize the fats and allow them to create a more sustainable energy. It's the same premise behind like what we talked about with Brain Fuel. Brain Fuel is the same concept, but in a, I don't even want to call it an energy drink, but it's because it's really not an energy drink, but it's the same concept in something that's not like a coffee, using MCT oil. So MCTs are, you've probably heard of them before. They're not just for people that are in ketosis. They're a very unique fat. They break down very fast in the body. Normally, when you think of a fat, you think slow digesting, cheese, things like that. It takes a while to break down. MCTs get into the bloodstream like that, and they turn into fuel very fast. Additionally, MCTs, yes, they can convert into ketones, but they also, there's a recent study saying that MCT oil changes our brain energetics. It changes how our brain has energy. fMRI scans, where they looked at the brain under MRI, they saw when people had MCT oil, their brain lit up. Something is happening there, and we don't exactly know what the mechanism of action is, but it's lighting the brain up in a very positive way. So if you have to eat something, have something with some MCT or some coconut oil. It just makes a world of a difference. And then while you're sitting at the table, you want to avoid blood sugar rises and falls. So this is going to sound insane, but pork rinds, that's a great little thing to snack on, especially if you're staying low carb, because there's no carbs in them. You get the crunch, you can get the snack satisfaction, but you're not getting the blood sugar roller coaster. They're actually a pretty darn good for you food, all things considered. Good quality cheeses. Like I would recommend like some Parmesan or some Pecorino Romano or good hard aged cheeses. Try not to go for the lower quality stuff. Like if you had to bring a snack, just bring some good, take some like Pecorino Romano is delicious cheese just to snack on. Cut it into some thin strips and just be a cheese muncher. Just be that guy. Own it.
All the poker players' luggages are going to start to smelling like cheese now. All right, so we're not supposed to eat before we play poker. Fine, we got it. What should we be doing in the morning? Because often poker tournaments don't start until about noon, or cash games don't start until about noon. So we have 3 or 4 hours. Is there anything we can do in that time, if we have time devoted to it, to help ourselves get in the zone and really just think the best we can when it is time to play?
Yep, totally. The first one that I've talked about is going to be cold showers, ice baths, things like that. That's a little bit weird. I understand.
I just hop in the morning and don't worry about it.
But it's something that anybody can do.
Yeah.
It depends on where you are, and it depends, when restrictions and things open up again. I'll just turn my camera. It's a little hard to see, but if you see out in the backyard, you might be able to see like a little door there. That's my outdoor sauna. I have a sauna because just like being in a cold temperature, being in an extremely hot temperature is even more powerful, because I want you to think about this. We have little teeny vessels in our brain, and they don't get activated and opened up a whole lot. But when you're under a good amount of heat for 15, 20, 30 minutes, those vessels open up and you get a lot more blood flow to the brain, but you also get what is called cerebral spinal fluid, CSF, which sounds so crazy, but it literally washes our brain. It's the job of cerebral spinal fluid to come in, flush out metabolites, flush out toxins, flush them out of the brain, back into the lymph where our body can flush them. It's called the glymphatic system. So a sauna is like so cool. And the nice thing is if you're normally playing at like these casinos or anything like that, a lot of times their gyms have them. So as long as things are opening up, because I know saunas are like in the highest restriction right now, so a lot of them aren't opened up, but it will come with time, do that. Otherwise, I'm telling you, like I have an outdoor barrel sauna, so that's a little bit more of an investment. You can get like an infrared sauna in your house for $1,500 to $2,500. And it's an investment well spent, because I can't make any guarantees, but chances are your brain's going to be on fire and you'll make some better decisions and it'll pay for itself, relatively quick. So the ice bath, the sauna, things like that. Another thing is, simply hydrating the heck up, and then also having a good amount of electrolytes, not from something like a Gatorade. I usually use various different electrolytes. I'll use one called a pickleball cocktail I like, which is literally just a brand name. I use another one called Element, LMNT. If you load up and have a little bit of sodium, it's going to allow the brain to send signals a little bit more, because the brain, neurologically speaking, how our entire nervous system works, we have an action potential, which is where before something happens, we send a surge of sodium, and these sodiums pump basically into the cell and From there, you have potassium that pulls it out. It kind of is this continual effect of like a slingshot. Sodium pushes it in, potassium slingshots it back. Sodium pushes into the next, basically acts on dendrite as you go down sort of your spinal cord. If you're deficient in sodium, that is less energy potential coming down the spine, coming down to the muscle, or going to different regions of the brain. So I would rather you have good amounts of sodium than not enough. So that doesn't mean you go eat a salty breakfast. It means you add a tiny bit of like pink Himalayan salt to your water. I'm sipping on it. I always have like a big jug of water with me or something. And I usually add salt to my water because if you hydrate and then if you add alcohol into the mix, you're just overhydrating and you're urinating out all these electrolytes and you're not replenishing them. So that is so important for brain function.
So if we know we're going to go play poker all day, we're going to have to sit there at the poker table for, let's say, noon until midnight, because that's often how long poker tournaments last. We're going to do this many days in a row. We want to work out sometime. It probably just has to be before the poker tournament starts. Should we be going like really hard before poker tournaments, or should we do generally light workouts, or mix it up, do whatever you want?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer might surprise you because people would normally think, oh, I want to save my energy. There's actually some very solid evidence that shows if you do something pretty difficult, like high intensity interval training, but just in a short fashion, you have a big surge in endorphins, in epinephrine, and also in what's called lactate, which stimulates the brain. So the goal is not to go and quote unquote, just get the blood moving. Like I just hear people say all the time, I just want to get some blood moving because I got a big day ahead of me. You're actually better off to just go balls to the wall, but just for a short amount of time. So the net aggregate is kind of like the same. So what I'd typically do is if I had a big mentally taxing day, I might go into the gym and do like a 15-minute circuit of just really high intensity, where maybe I'm doing like a 30-second sprint on the bike, followed by a 1-minute recovery, followed by 30-minute sprint. So just doing a high intensity interval
30-second sprint, right?
Yes. Yeah, 30-second sprint. Did I say minute?
You did say 30-minute. You can do 30-minute sprints. None of us can.
Yeah, so like literally 20 to 30 seconds.
Okay.
The way that I look at exercise and high intensity interval training is if you are doing it right, you really shouldn't be able to push it 100% for longer than 15 to 30 seconds. If you can go longer than that, you're not pushing it hard enough. You should be going all the way until you're like, I'm done. And then you recover as long as you need to be able to do that again. High intensity interval training is so powerful for the brain. So I don't care if it takes you 2 minutes to recover. The power is in making sure that you get that short, intense burst, because that's what sends the signals to the brain. That's what sends that electricity and allows your brain to wake up. And you do that for 15 total minutes, not 15 working minutes. So if you're doing 1 minute on or 30 seconds on, 1 minute off, you're really only going to be having to go through 7-ish times or so before you're done. And that's your workout. But you will find that just kickstarts your day so well.
Awesome. Good. When we are at the poker table, we usually get 5-minute breaks every hour, 15-minute breaks every 2 hours, something like that, depending on exactly what you're playing. Is there any sort of like quick thing we can do on our break to stay moving, make good use of this time we have?
Yeah, I mean, when it's quick breaks like that, it makes it a little bit tougher. But what you do want to focus on is getting the full body moving. So the best kind of thing that you could do is, some kind of hanging movement. Like if you've got, a pull-up bar or something, that would be like the ideal movement because you're stretching.
No hanging movements. We're in a casino.
Exactly.
In a convention center. Imagine we're in a convention center. What can we do with
if enough people do it, they'll just assume it's normal. No, just kidding.
You can grab onto a door frame, by the way, and do pull-ups. In hotel rooms, I often grab the door frame and do pull-ups.
Point in saying that is, the idea is getting the full body and as much mobility and range as you can. I also don't expect you to be doing a bunch of like burpees or crazy high intensity moves, but there's some old stuff about like Tony Robbins used to have a trampoline. Like that was his thing. Like he would start his day with a trampoline because it was all about his lymphatic system. Not saying you bring a trampoline with you, but if you were to just go outside and just jump up and down a little bit, just for 5 minutes, just kind of bounce. You don't even have to. What that does is that not only gets the blood circulating, but it gets the lymphatic system moving, which flushes out a lot of the metabolites that usually pool up when you're sitting down. So you can't just get up and walk. That'll do a little bit. That gets blood and circulation going, but you have to get the lymphatic system. So like you see, like if you've ever seen like images of like rock stars before they go on stage or anything like that, you notice how they're always jumping? They do that because it gets the epinephrine going and it gets things going. There's a reason for it. So if you want to keep your head in the game, it does help to just go out and just, do 30 seconds of just kind of bouncing and just get the blood moving that way.
Awesome. So when we're sitting at the poker table, often we don't have the option to use a standing desk. If we are at a casino, we have to sit in a chair.
Yep.
Is there anything we can do to mitigate the damage of sitting, or just generally have good posture? Like what are some tips to people who are typically used to slouching over?
Yeah, it kind of comes back to, again, the next movement is the best, or the next position is the best position. There's a common fallacy out there that like sitting at a desk is going to give you bad posture. Yes, it can, but there's also more evidence that shows by trying to correct your posture while you're sitting actually causes more damage and more pain because it becomes very unnatural for you. It's not to say that sitting slouched over is correct. It's just saying, like, if your body has already taken that position, I'm going to turn to the side so you can see it. You're kind of like this. If you try to sit upright, you're not going to have enough muscular strength to like change your thoracic spine. Like, you're just not. You'd have to like literally have it physically assisted. But what you can do is always be moving. Okay, so it's so easy to be like this and just stay like that for 15 minutes. You need to, if you have to, just remind yourself every 5 minutes, do something different. When I'm at my desk, I literally every 5 minutes or so will turn and I'll literally type sideways like this, like I'm turned like this, or I'll do this because I know that the next movement is the best movement. It's crazy because even at a stand-up desk, it's just as bad as at a sitting desk because you still end up in the same position and you're still frozen. The only thing is now I have tight hamstrings instead of tight hip flexors. Like, yeah.
All right, cool. I used to sit at the poker table like this, and now I have a bad right side of my neck.
Yep, totally. Or text neck, like we're always like looking down at our phones. You know?
Yeah, it's not good. Make sure you're moving around. A lot of poker players, when they go to the casino, especially once they all reopen after COVID, are going to go out and they're going to party all night, and then they're going to go try to play poker the next day. Is that a wise idea, or should they care about their sleep at all?
I think we've seen, if anything, is that sleep is probably one of the most important things for cognitive function. And I know it can be difficult, but yes, sleep is definitely. Even if you drink until you pass out and you stay passed out for 8 hours, your level of sleep and your stage 2 and your REM sleep are going to be so disrupted. You're not getting the proper like defragmentation within the brain that you need to really be your best self. So I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world to say, but you really should, limit it to like 2 drinks and just, keep it simple. Another thing that, is there's something called kava, Kava, which is an oil that they use like in Fiji and a lot of the South Pacific Islands that has a lot of like really similar attributes to alcohol as far as like the social side goes, but without the sort of impairment. So, and it doesn't affect the liver in a negative way. So it's just something to look into, like alternatives, right? So it's like, just like brain fuel is a great alternative to coffee, kava can be a great alternative to alcohol. So just these things to consider where you can still loosen up and have a good time, but you're not disrupting your sleep.
Awesome. Well, we could talk for forever. There's all sorts of things relating to health, fitness, mindset, etc. that you are a master at. If people want to learn more about you, they can check out your YouTube channel at youtube.com/Thomas DeLauer official. Any parting words before we wrap it up today?
No, I just want to thank everyone for being here and for taking that next step to level up your nutrition. I mean, you're already being the difference in the rest of the community by being people that are focused on this because at the end of the day, this is a very cerebral game, and you can have that cutting edge.
It definitely is. Poker players almost act as if they are not playing a cerebral game, and it'd be like an athlete not taking care of their muscles, right? Poker players need to take care of their brains, and doing all the things you discuss over at your channel will help them make the most of their opportunities.
Well, without a doubt. And also want to just, a big thank you, as we've mentioned a couple of times, to BrèINFúEL for what they're doing within the poker community too. I just think it's cool. I mean, yes, we do some work with them, and that's how John and I have come to be friends. Is we both work with BrèINFúEL, just me so on the kind of the cognitive performance side and him on the poker side. But I just appreciate that there are brands that are focusing on being better for you and actually like really enhancing performance, but also looking at the longevity piece too, which is cool. So we're not just hammering ourselves full of like sugary energy drinks all the time.
For sure. I used to drink a ton of coffee before I found BrèINFúEL. Now I have a coffee bright and early in the morning. Then about an hour or two later, I have BrèINFúEL at 9 a.m. And then I'm just good to go for the rest of the day. So if anyone drinks loads of coffee, check out BrèINFúEL. You can use code POKERCOACHING to get 15% off. So you get a little bit of a discount for being here today. Thank you very much, Thomas. I appreciate you. If we can help in any way, just let us know.